Good evening, everybody. So can everybody see the presentation? Very good. So my name is Hever-Chybowski, and I'm researcher at the Seminar for Jewish Studies at the Martin Luther University. And I'm conducting a 3-year research project, which began in April 2025. And I'm studying the representations of Arabs and Arabic in Yiddish literature, but also cultural relations between Yiddish and Arabic. I will give this presentation today. I will give an online presentation of my entire research project next week on Tuesday at Dartmouth College. And if anybody would like to attend and understand what I'm working on globally, all the chapters, please contact me per email and I will send you a link. But today, I would like to speak with you about only a single chapter of my work, which concerns a corpus I've become acquainted with during my previous position as director of the Medem Library in Paris, which is Europe's largest dedicated Yiddish library. During the 11 years in which I worked there, between 2014 and 2025, I've stumbled many times upon the library's Betsalel Frenkel collection, an exceptionally fascinating treasure for any Yiddish library. The previous director of the Medem Library, Gilles Rosier, describes the collection in a Hebrew diary, which was published in an Israeli literary journal in January 2009. In the entry from July 2008, Rosier writes, and I'm quoting, "I'm thinking about the bookstore and library that Betsalel Frenkel, a Jew born in Vilnius, established in Jaffa at the beginning of the 20th century. He sold books there in Yiddish and Hebrew, sometimes also in Russian, and he also lent them out, because those were the days in which readers couldn't always afford to buy books. Betsalel was a Russian subject, and on December 17, 1914, he was counted among the enemy nationals whom the Turks arrested and deported by ship to Egypt. In Alexandria, he continued his work as a bookseller and librarian, developed an enthusiastic interest in the art of animated film, which was in its infancy, and began working in the production of Chinese-style furniture. Thanks to the Chinese furniture, he was able to finance his cinematic hobby. Walt Disney created the character of Mickey Mouse in America, while he created at the same time in Egypt silent animated films whose hero was a small monkey with a fez on its head. In 1956, Betsalel Frenkel was forced to sail again, this time to France, and took his library with him. He settled in Brunois, not far from Paris, and re-established the library in the basement of his villa. He forbade his children to touch this holy of holies, which bore the seal of his wanderings. But the condition of the books deteriorated. At the end of the 19th, about 10 years after his death, his grandson, Didier, who is actually right here, I would like to recognize the fact that Didier Frenkel, I just saw, is attending this lecture, and this is very moving, and thank you so much, Didier, for being here. So his grandson, I continue the quote of Gilles Rosier, okay? His grandson, Didier, made contact with a rabbi of the Brunois yeshiva and asked him what to do with thousands of books in Hebrew and Yiddish, the oldest of which were printed at the end of the 19th century. The rabbi asked him about the condition of the books, and he explained that they were in poor condition. Bury them, the rabbi advised him. Didier was not satisfied with the answer. He made contact with the Medem Library, and I traveled to Brunois. I found there a collection of books full of dust, partly infested with worms, but some of the books were very valuable. Among them was a collection of about 300 pulp novels, so trash novels, those romantic novels of the type that brought cheap tears to the eyes of servants in kitchens, Betsalel kept all these books, which were usually thrown into the trash cans of Eastern Europe and the United States. And so the Medem Library found itself holding among its books one of the finest collections in the world of pulp literature. Another strange matter. Betsalel used to repair his books with all kinds of newspapers and various cardboard papers. The inner bindings were reinforced with clippings from Arabic newspapers, with cards that allocated places of honor in the Ashkenazi synagogue of Alexandria, with reports from the board of trustees meetings of that synagogue, with advertisements in Hebrew from his time living in Jaffa, and more and more. Now, this very moving but very short diary entry, written by a library director, a decade after the collection was donated to his library, is one of the longest descriptions of the collections ever published. The only other description, slightly longer from this one, was published anonymously in June 1997, shortly after the donation, in the Medem Library's magazine for Yiddish students, the Yiddische Tamtam. Here you have a picture of it. It is a journal which produces very simple texts in Yiddish for people who study Yiddish, with footnotes glossing difficult words. And there, in this journal, we find an article that is called The History of the Yiddish Book Collection, and I would like to read to you a short citation from it. In a Parisian cellar lay for years a true treasure. It was not gold and not silver, but something much rarer, old Yiddish books. There were over 800 of them, most published before the First World War. One could find there books of all sorts of genres, help books such as Practical Family Doctor, or Scarlet Fever and the Means to Prevent It, or Good Manners and Fine Etiquette. One could find there translations, such as, for example, an adaptation of Robinson Crusoe from the year 1894. One could find there prayer books, dream interpretation books, old Yiddish tear-off calendars, and most importantly, pulp literature, like, for example, Melanie or Under Death's Dominion, the tragic fate of one young mother over whom thousands of young girls must have cried their eyes out. But don't think that because this genre was called pulp or trash, in Yiddish it's called shund, it can simply be erased from the history of Yiddish literature. Firstly, the boundary between true literature and pulp literature is not always clear. And secondly, these very novels and novellas, with their down-to-earth yet captivating adventures, attracted the broad masses to the book and instilled in them the habit of reading, which they might not have without which they might not have taken up the books of Sholem Aleichem and Mendele Mocher Sforim, so names of classic Yiddish writers. Now, end of quotation. The article continues to tell the story of Betsalel Frenkel's life story from Eastern Europe to Palestine, then to Alexandria, and eventually to Paris. I will return in detail to this later. Now, the article is later supplemented by a second article, which is called An Overview of the Book Collection, in which we find a description of a single item of the collection, which is an illustrated calendar from 1899, bearing the subtitle, A Historical Literary Book, with a lot of illustrations and advertisements. Over the years, the Medem Library did organize a number of presentations of the collections, some of which I have attended. And I would like to thank here the library's chief librarian, Natalia Krnitska, my very dear colleague for a decade, who shared her PowerPoint presentation with me. It's not the one that you're seeing. It's a different one. I took some pictures from it, as well as a list of items which were prepared by Dominique Dauchet, a volunteer of the library some years ago. However, besides these very two short published accounts and the very little information that I could get from Natalia, the collection remains completely unexploited and undocumented. And this despite the incredible value of its items, and also as a collection as a whole, which is something that I will speak about. My work on the collection is thus really a first attempt to fill this scholarly lacuna. Now, I would like to say that for the authors of the Rechytsa Tamtam, which you see before your eyes, and the library's director at the time, Gilles Rosier, Betsalel's collection was mainly significant for having conserved popular items, which were seldom treated with the same care as works of higher status literature, right? Be it fiction or non-fiction. So basically, works of high standard, high status literature, which made up the canon of Yiddish modern literature, of course, were preserved, and we find them, and they were not thrown in the trash. But Betsalel Frenkel collected a lot of books that are very rare today because people didn't treat them as things that needs to be conserved. Now, this Yiddishist fascination with popular culture expressions and with low status cultural artifacts has a very long tradition on its own. It goes back to Yiddish folklore research in the 1920s and even earlier, so there's a very long tradition here. Now, we should bear in mind this unique quality of the books, but my interest in Betsalel Frenkel's collection has to do rather with its location in Palestine and Egypt, and within the Arabic cultural context, which is something that was only alluded to by the accounts, but never really exploited or researched. I am particularly interested, as I will develop in this lecture, in the materiality of Arabic Yiddish proximity, which is a feature not only of the historical geographic locations of the collection, the fact that these are Yiddish books in Palestine and later in Alexandria, Egypt, but also, as we should see, this materiality also has to do with some of the items themselves. So there's an Arabic Yiddish materiality in the items themselves. You've seen the poster for this lecture. You might have an idea what I'm talking about. Okay. Now we're moving to the historical reconstruction. First of all, of Betsalel Frenkel's life. At this stage, I would like to present my own description of his life and work and of the collection. And this is based on many different sources that I could find, but I would like to say this is still a very preliminary stage of my research, and any corrections or additions would be highly appreciated. I'm especially looking here at Didier Frenkel, who I am sure conducted a lot of personal research here. This is actually, we never met, we never spoke. I'm going to phone you, Didier, maybe tomorrow, but I will show you things that might be new for you and might be corrected by you. So this is something that is, for me, both, it's very valuable. And also family oral history is also a part of the tools with which we can reconstruct these very, very important histories. So without further ado, Nahum Betsalel Berkovich Frenkel, okay, this is the full name that I came up with, I will come to it later, was not born in Vilnius, as was quoted before, but rather in Rechytsa, now in Belarus. As for his years of birth, we find both 1876 and 1882, and maybe even other dates. Such gaps are not uncommon in biographies of East European Jews born in the 19th century, and there are very often traces of attempts to avoid military service. This is not the only reason, but this is very often the reason why we find different dates in biographies of people in the 19th century, not only Jews, but Jews in Tsarist Russia. This is classic. Now, the contradicting accounts of his birth year support the claim in the Yiddish Tamtam that Frenkel left Russia in 1905 to avoid military service. And a short survey of the mentions of Rechytsa in the Hebrew press at the time reveals that exemptions from military service from the Tsarist army were particularly difficult to obtain, and that young men were particularly exposed to the most unwelcome recruitment. So basically, if you look at articles about Rechytsa in the Hebrew press, They basically talk about military service. So again, I think this supports a bit the idea. There is an alternative motive for his immigration, which is cited by Leonid Smilovitsky and other scholars, which was the pogroms taking place in Russia after the first Russian Revolution of 1905. And the motives do not exclude one another. It is possible also to accommodate both. At any rate, sometimes in 1905, Betsalel Frenkel leaves Rechytsa, to Jaffa, Palestine, with his wife Gnisa Ginsburg and his son Herschel, maybe also his son Yirmiye. We'll get to this later. There is at least one item in the collection that appears to have traveled from Belarus to Palestine. So at least one book that they took with them. And here I would like to express my utmost gratitude to my dear friend Uri Choresh, who is also here among us, who took photographs of several of the items that I will show you here today. And I will also thank him later for a different occasion. So this is my first thank you to Uri, because I found here something that nobody saw or wrote about. I don't know if Didier Frenkel knows about it. Here you can see a photo of the book, Der seltener, ewiger, wunderbarer Kalender. Okay, I guess German speakers understand. The rare, eternal, and wonderful calendar. So basically, this is actually, indeed, I looked at it. It is a wonderful calendar. It's much more than a calendar. It has all the names of cities in Russia and what the distance is from each city to the other major cities and countries of the world. And basically, it is an extremely practical book for anybody who wants to travel the world. Right? There was no Google. There were no travel agencies in the modern sense of the word. And this book was the travel agency of people living in Russia, one of them. So also makes sense why they took it with them. But I personally came to the conclusion that the book must have been taken with Betsalel from Rechytsa because of the stamp. Here, you can see it bigger. Bookstore of Dober Frenkel, Rechytsa means governor. Now, I found several references to the bookseller Dober Frenkel in Rechytsa in historical Hebrew press, but nothing that links him to Betsalel Frenkel. For the time being, I assume that some family connection existed between the two, and that Betsalel's career in the business of books had its origins in his birth town, Rechytsa. Now, in Jaffa, we know that his bookstore, and let's go to Jaffa, right? So he moved to Jaffa in 1904. This is Jaffa. All of my pictures have horses in them. Do I have a picture? Yeah, you see the horses here. And here you have horses in Jaffa. Later we move to Alexandria. You see horses in Alexandria. Okay, so in Jaffa, we know that his bookstore was in Neve Shalom. Not to be confused with the Arab Jewish cooperative village, Neve Shalom, or Wahat As-Salam, established in the state of Israel in 1969. Neve Shalom, the one in Jaffa, was founded in 1890 at the outskirts of Jaffa as part of the early stage of Jewish colonization in Palestine. And here we have a newspaper, Acherut. The transliteration is à la française, Acherut, but actually this is Hey, Acherut. And it was, so Acherut means freedom, and it was a national newspaper in Palestine that was interestingly edited by Sephardim. Very interesting piece of journalism. And we find there ads saying that it can be found in Jaffa in the bookstore of Betsalel Frenkel in Neve Shalom. And this is how I can pinpoint where the bookstore was, at least in Jaffa. Now, right. For this period, we find in the collection itself 2 stamps. So I mean, the books themselves carry 2 stamps that date to the time in Jaffa, and they reveal quite a lot of information. So here's the first, okay? In the following stamp, we find the first evidence that Frenkel's business was not only of a merchant. He was not only a merchant, but it also had an element of artisanry, okay? Namely bookbinding. Bear this in mind, as this will play a major role later on in my lecture. Now, the text above the line is in Hebrew: bookstore, bookbindery, and stationery, B. Frenkel, Jaffa, land of Israel. As for the text below the line, Buchhandlung, B. Frenkel, Jaffa, Palestina, while on all accounts it is good German, absolutely, this is good German, Yiddish readers would perfectly understand it, and at the time would be quite used to the customary avoidance of explicitly referring to Yiddish, a language still suffering very much from external prejudice and internal self-denigration. So this is like classic. I'm not sure. I suspect that Frenkel had no German books or very little German books in his bookstore, but Buchhandlung is written in Latin characters to signal that there are Yiddish books there without using Yiddish. Okay, this has to do with social linguistics of Yiddish at the time, and to this day, to a certain extent. But there's also another stamp from this period, entirely in Hebrew. Sorry, these are many stamps. You see them? Okay, no new information here. Now there's another stamp from this period, which it's only in Hebrew, and I translate it to you. Bookstore and bookbinding shop with Hebrew and Yiddish lending library of Betsalel Frenkel in the holy city of Jaffa. May it be rebuilt and re-established. Note that the term for Yiddish here is jargon, originally a pejorative name of the language, but jargon, for those of you who know Hebrew letters, it's here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor? Yeah, okay, great. So jargon was a pejorative name of the language, but at this period, a standard denomination, okay? Also note how the place name Jaffa is supplemented with prefixing and postfixing acronyms. You can see the acronyms here. This is an acronym sign. And this is before, so Yiddish and Hebrew are written right to left, like Arabic. So we have here Holy City from the right, which positions the stamp as a pious stamp in a way, the Holy City of Jaffa. And here we find at the left, may it be rebuilt and reestablished, also only 2 letters, but this is what it means. And now the Zionist ideological context is established. So when you say Jaffa should be rebuilt and reestablished, obviously this is from a Zionist point of view, not from any other point of view. Now, it remains to be established whether the duality of these 2 stamps represents simultaneous usage for different sorts of audiences, or an update from one stamp to another. Now, considering the superior design of the round stamp, okay, I would say it's superior from a graphic design point of view. Wait a second. Yeah, considering the superior design of the round stamp and its much more frequent appearance in the collection, I would hypothesize that the round stamp was designed to supplant the square one. So this is the updated one. If this is the case, then the introduction of Latin letters, the disappearance of the reference to Yiddish, and the removal of ideological and pious connotations can all be taken as evidence for a move towards professionalization by Frenkel. Later episodes in his biography and career choices, as we shall presently see, fit the general impression that Frenkel was not interested in limiting his creative work to the relatively small Zionist public in Palestine, which was beginning to be torn between Hebrew and Yiddish in those years. But in other words, we may find an evidence here that Frenkel began to think big already in his years in Jaffa. We will see how this thinking big gets exploded, right, in Alexandria with with the cartoon, with the animation, Mish Mish Efendi. So, as Gilles Rosier mentioned, Frenkel's family was deported in 1914 to Egypt following the outbreak of the First World War, establishing itself now in Alexandria. By far, here you see more horses, by far the biggest metropolis Frenkel ever lived in so far. Okay? And I managed also to find really a picture from 1914. The same goes for Jaffa. The move to Alexandria sees the introduction of a new stamp visible in the collection. Here we see it. On the top, in Hebrew, we read bookstore, Beit Mischar Sfarim, bookstore. This is followed by librairie, French for bookstore. Then B. Frenkel, between two stars of David, and below in Hebrew, again, Alexandria, Egypt, Jaffa, the land of Israel. It looks like an underscore, which is an interesting typographic choice for the time. Okay. Now, the change from German Yiddish to French is, of course, expected for the context of Alexandria. I don't think I need to explain this. The addition of the Stars of David makes the Jewishness of the business very explicit, nothing to be ashamed of, right? Also, no fear. The addition of Jaffa at the end of the stamp most likely represents Frenkel's wish to maintain recognizable, right? For his label to remain recognizable. As we shall see later, Frenkel used his stamps also in correspondence with European bookstores, from which he most probably obtained the overwhelming majority of his books, right? Most of them traveled by post to Alexandria or to Jaffa from Europe. Now, the addition Jaffa, land of Israel, is also a clear indication to his colleagues in Europe that this indeed is the same Frenkel they were in business with before. Here we see Frenkel's address in Alexandria, 17 Rue d'Anastasie, nothing to do with anesthesia, it's Anastasia, which is today Sharia al-Jazair. I hope I say it correctly. Thank you for that. The address is corroborated in a very precious document preserved by the UN archives in Geneva. Here again, I don't know if Didier knows this, maybe you do, but this is a very, very important document for reconstructing this history. So what we see here is a petition to the High Commissioner of the League of Nations for Refugee Affairs, in which Betsalel Frenkel, and this is the only document in which I found the name Berkovich, which is very peculiar. This idea that the person would have two family names, a man, all the more. There's much to think about. But for the time being, let's call him Betsalel Berkovich Frenkel. This is how he calls himself in this document. Residing in 17 Rue d'Anastasie, he writes it in Russian here, and he petitions for a Nansen passport. Nansen, I'm not sure what's the right pronunciation. These were the stateless persons passports introduced by the League of Nations in 1922. This belongs also to the aftermath of the First World War. Following the Russian Revolution, the Frenkel family, deported now from Palestine by the Ottomans, found itself indeed stateless, right? They were citizens of no state at all. And then he writes in Russian, finding myself in a difficult situation as a refugee, and also because I have no possibility to obtain the necessary documents for residence and departure, and am forced to live with a temporary permit passport, suffering materially and legally, blah, 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 blah. There's no point there. I apply for sorry, I put a point here, but this is a mistake. Now, it should first, the text goes on, yeah? It should first be noted that this is one of the only records of Betsalel Frenkel's own voice I was able to retrieve. Again, I appeal to you, Didier Frenkel here, if you have letters that you found in his voice, this is so important when we reconstruct historically anything, right? Not just to narrate them, but to find a way for them to narrate, to see how they narrate themselves. In the same document, Frenkel lists the names and ages of his wife and 7 sons. Gesia Aronova, different spelling, of his wife, 44 years old, son Yeremi, 21, son Girsh, 24, that's probably Herschel. Son Solomon, 16 years old, David, etc., etc. Now, unfortunately, the document does not indicate Betsalel's age or date of birth, but we can reconstruct from it family tree real quickly. So we basically see here Yeremiah. I'm not sure if he was born in Russia or in Palestine, because he was probably born around 1905. And we have here basically 4 boys and 3 girls. And you can see who was born where, which is not so important for us, but it is important to highlight these 3. Okay, now these 3, Herschel, Shloim, and David, that's the Yiddish names, also known as the Frenkel Brothers, are known mostly as the creators of the first Arabic animation film, Mish Mish Efendi. Now here you go. They even have a Wikipedia article. Yeah. Now the Frenkel brothers and their cinematographic enterprise did catch quite a bit of scholarly attention, and there's even a documentary film about them. Mish Mish Efendi, Mish Mish it's called. Yeah, it's a good film. While in several accounts Betsalel's role in the creation of Mish Mish Efendi is recognized, most of the accounts concentrate only on the 3 brothers, as you can see here in the poster, usually omitting the fact that these 3 brothers had in fact a 4th brother, 3 more sisters, and the father is mentioned in the film, but not as a co-creator. Now, while unaware or ignoring the existence of the daughters, the scholar Leonid Smilovitsky describes the versatile artistic endeavor of the Frenkels as involving Betsalel and his sons, and I would like to read to you a quote. Quote, Frenkel and his 4 sons were artists. From 1929 to 1932, they made furniture. In 1936, they were awarded a gold medal at the International Handicrafts and Industries exhibition in Cairo and won the right to be the official suppliers of King Farouk. After 1935, they started making animated cartoons and produced the first soundtrack animated cartoons film in Arabic. During 36 to 64, they shot, no, this is a mistake, but this, whatever. No, it's not a mistake. 36 to 64, they shot 30 animated cartoons. After the Israeli War of Independence in 48, they were persecuted by the Egyptian authorities and left for France. Okay, so basically, I think I need to move a bit faster because time is running up. I see Firas nodding. So now I want you to have all of this in mind. The creativity of this family, the fact that they saw themselves as artists. As I move to just 2 examples from the collection, okay? I'll try to do it very quickly. We have here a book, Blumen, Flowers, by Shalom Aleichem, maybe the most known Yiddish writer. And when you open it, you find this, okay? Now, again, I would like very much to thank Uri Choresh, who is here, who also helped me he translated this for me. My Arabic is still a beginner's. And the thing is here, judging from the contents of this text, it's clearly, it's probably a newspaper or a newsletter. There's a report about the official memorandum determining the price of meat. There's a report about the financing of the project commemorating Lord Kitchener. In the back side, you have an advertisement for a clothing shop. Yeah, those of you who tilt their head can read. And it seems like it has absolutely nothing to do with anything. It's just random. Okay? Okay. Now let's look at this book. Sefer Amidot, Jacob Kranz. So this is a pious book. This is a Yiddish translation of a Hebrew book, the Book of Virtues, Sefer Amidot. This is the translation. And we already see, it's a similar technique. We already see here the document is Greek and French. So, well, it's Greek and French, if you want. And here, this is the other side. It's the same document. And we have Arabic and we have French. And now if we look at it, we see we have here basically a brochure of a cinema, advertising and showing times of 3 films There's the science fiction series Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars from 1938. There's the Egyptian film Nasheed al-Amal, right, starring Kulthum. And there's Mafish Faida here, Mafish Faida from 1936, which features Mish Mish Efendi, that's the main character, a production of the Frenkel Brothers. Okay, so before I move to analyze this, I just think, can we show you just for a minute Mafish Faida? Okay, so this is not the best quality. I'm so sorry. I'm sure that Didier has a much better one. I took just one from YouTube. I'm so sorry. This does not do justice to the restored ones, but I just don't have access to them at this point. How do I do this? I do this and this. So just, this is very poor quality, and I'm sorry again, but you can see a bit. Okay, I think we got the gist of it. This is not the topic of my lecture, but yeah, it was important for me to share, just so you get a glimpse. But in coming back to this, okay, to this book, you see it? Okay, so here we cannot say that this is random. There's absolutely no way we can dismiss the sentimental and monumental gesture of interweaving this particular page within a book of his collection, right? I would argue that these book bindings should not be considered as random, but rather as deliberate acts of an artist who creates meaning precisely in his work of artisanry as a binder. In other words, these books don't just happen to showcase Arabic next to Yiddish. Rather than accidental curiosities, they should be considered as artifacts conveying meanings which expand their function as books in a lending library into veritable works of art. We can extrapolate from the clear-cut case of binding here, Sefer Amidot, with the Mish Mish Efendi brochure. We can extrapolate from it, I think, to the meaning of this other example, which seems meaningless, right? As a librarian, furniture maker, bookbinder, animator, Frenkel had clearly enough access to all sorts of neutral binding materials. This is not, right? This is not an economical decision. The choice of transforming written documents into binding material is a marked choice, which indicates intention. If in the case of Sefer Amidot, the intention can be easily explained via a personal connection, then in the case of Blumen here, right? Blumen, that's the name of the book. The only explanation that I could come up with is the mere physical juxtaposition of Arabic and Yiddish. And I think that in the same way that it is intriguing for us when we see it today, oh, Yiddish next to Arabic, it's intriguing. I think this is pretty much what was moving Frenkel as well. He was creating a monument not just to his personal achievements and the achievements of his sons, of which he was clearly very proud of, but he was also creating a monument to the background of his life, which was Yiddish and Arabic next to another. And not just as languages, but also as cultures, as creative cultures, right? He created in Arabic, and he created as a bookbinder. He created also, or as a bookseller, he created in Yiddish. He was within these two spheres, within these two cultural spheres. And my claim is that these artifacts are everything but random and unintentional. Now, Fortunately for me, there's much more work to do because there's still many more items that I need to go through in the collection in order, hopefully I will find other examples. I know that there were because they were reported. I still didn't find them showing other kinds of bindings. And what I shared with you today is my first hypothesis, and with the hope of refining this into the chapter that is going to be part of my monography. And to finish, okay, because we did start a couple of minutes late, so I give myself 3 more minutes just to finish. I would like not so much, okay, this is another book of the collection just to show you, yeah, published in Cairo. For those of you who can read Arabic, you can enjoy. I will not speak about it. I will move to the end of my talk. So basically, I would say that most of the descriptions of the collection end in Paris, right? How it came into Paris, and I don't need to speak about it. I began with this. I want to finish in a different point. I want to finish in 1946. So we're still in Egypt. We're not in Alexandria anymore. Frenkel moved to Cairo, and we see it from the address. And I found in scholarly accounts of Betsalel, some say Cairo, some say Alexandria. From it, it's pretty clear. They moved to Alexandria and they moved to Cairo at a certain stage. I don't know exactly when, but by 46, his bookstore was in Cairo. I don't know if he commuted between the two cities. I don't believe it, but his bookstore was certainly in Cairo. You see, it's the same stamp without the address also. So he removed Alexandria. And it is a year after the genocide, after the end of the genocide, after the end of the Nazi genocide, where the entire Yiddish civilization in Europe was completely shattered. Yiddish and Hebrew, Jewish civilization in Europe was completely annihilated. And Betsalel Frenkel is sending postcards to the same bookstores with which he was in contact throughout the years. And he writes to them, "Tshuvatchem al dvar mischar." There was different formulations. Basically, he's asking them, would you like to continue? Would you like to? I'm waiting for a response from you if you want to engage in commerce. So this is the way in which one bookseller writes to another, okay? And he gives his own address, and on the right is the address of the bookstore. And we have here, he sent mainly to Warsaw. This is also Warsaw. He also sends, this is to Lodz in Poland, this is to Paris, this is to Vienna. And these were found also by Didier, who is here, and he might want to say a few things about it. Didier Frenkel. It was found as part of the archive of Betsalel Frenkel. And it was donated to Yad Vashem. And the interesting and heartbreaking thing here is that all of these postcards were returned back. And you can see the postman in Poland wrote Maison brûlée. So burnt house. So one after another, we have bookstores in Poland which Frenkel knew that it's their addresses and was in communication with them, which of course was broken during the war, and he's trying to reestablish it after the war. And one after another, he receives them back. The letter was not sent. You can see the post is from Egypt. It doesn't get a new stamp. There's no stamp. It is returned to sender. Return to sender, Maison brûlée. Either in Polish or in French, Maison brûlée. Maison brûlée. One after another. And here again, I'm sorry that I'm finishing a bit with minor sad tone or chord, but for me it goes a bit beyond the finishing. I have a case here. He collected these postcards. Wait a second, let's finish them here. He collected these postcards. Here, return to sender. He collected them, and they also become a sort of a sentimental and monumental artifact. He didn't throw them away. He kept them together with his books. And they also constitute, I would say, an artistic, or even, I don't know if artistic is the right word, but anyway, a very meaningful gesture. And as a collection they represent something. In this case, they represent, I think, the fate of Ashkenazi Jewry in Europe. But I'm using this to speak also about the bindings of the other books. I think that a lot of, like what I try to show here, is how Frenkel's work was intentional, and he left a sort of a monument after him, which is full of meaning and is not accidental. And part of another argument, I think, to support what I'm saying here, is that he did not depart from this collection when he moved to Paris. And it was a very big collection. The estimates is between 1,800 books. There are different estimations. And he moved all of those books to Paris, and he sealed them in his cellar. And he, well, according to Gilles Rosier, did not allow the family to touch them. Certainly, there was some kind of a museum or a personal museum that was established there. Call it however you want. These are not just anything. These are monuments that he co-created as a bookbinder, and yeah, and it's a very, very, very fortunate matter that Didier Frenkel found them in the cellar and decided, together with the reels of Mish Mish Efendi, it's the same historical event, right? He found them both. The films were donated to the Film Institute, to the Cinematographic Institute of France, and the books were donated to the Medem Library. And this is the end of my talk. Sorry, I could have ended it a bit nicer, but that's when you improvise. And this is, again, my email address. And I would love for you to get in touch with me if you have any additions or comments, or if you would like to hear about my research also, besides the collection of Betsalel Frenkel. Thank you so much.